Isaac Sarason is a skilled hacker, formerly employed by British Telecom-Sprint. When his health failed, Isaac did the only thing he could think of. He ran. He found a haven in a working-class district of the city known as Little Russia. There Isaac took on a new name, Ishmael. He then became embroiled in the affairs of a brutal member of the Lamediza organized crime family, known as Leo. Convinced by his longtime friend Frankie to flee from his commitments to the Lamediza family, Isaac found himself hunted by the ruthless Leo. On a rooftop, far from witnesses, Leo murdered Frankie. Only through the use of his skills as a hacker was Isaac able to drive Leo off. Wounded, alone, and far from help, Isaac depended on the kindness of strangers. One stranger, a burqa-wearing doctor known as Fatima, took pity on Isaac and helped him make his way to the mysterious Star X line. At the end of all hope, they found the Star X line and the slim promise that the enigmatic beings behind the Star X could save Isaac from the implants which destroyed his life. What do you do when those who saved you have recorded everything you are? What do you do when your every action is tracked by the Keylogger? Colbyjack.net is proud to present Firmware Keylogger, the third installment in the firmware pentology by Colbytrax. 00-10-01. Knowing what I was made everything make sense. My wandering through the city, seeing things I couldn't see, in places I couldn't know about, was just me wandering the camera networks. If everything this shard of me perceived came from remote sensors located across the city, then the fading to white of the world after Nona killed Ivane made sense. She had dropped a device created to blind cameras by overloading the receptors, which in turn blinded me. David had called it a blob when I asked him about it in the Red Square all those long months ago. He threw it down. It would go off and blind every camera in sight. David had taken offense right after then. His mood toward me had shifted as suddenly as the weather along North Shore. If only I'd known his connection to Leo, I might not have been so hot to challenge him a few minutes later in the tea house at the back of the Red Square. If only I hadn't given Leo enough jewels to bankroll a small business for safekeeping. Could that have been what pushed Leo to come after me? Could the allure of cash in the hand have overwhelmed his respect for his boss, Sergio Lamediza? Or was there something else at play? Maybe some primal thing whispered to him deep in the night, a dark something which pushed him to attempt to become the boss himself. Was I just collateral damage in a war I would never understand for stakes I had no interest in? The me of hormones, emotions, and random biological urges, that me would wonder what would cause two men to use a girl, Nona, as a pawn in their bloody war. The me of the electronic world, the me of parallel processors and simulated neurological structures, knew she was not the innocent I had first thought she was. It was still me who had first thought of her as an innocent victim. I had thought of her as someone to save from a brutal man and a horrible life of which I could not comprehend. I had been so very wrong. I had tried to be a knight riding to the rescue of a damsel in distress. I had fallen for tales and narratives which had been out of favor in popular culture since before I was born. Images at odds with everything I was raised to understand was how I saw Nona in those first hours and days. I now knew that both Leo and Sergio understood that under their veneer of modern civilization, the average man still thought of himself as a protector of his woman. This is what they both played off, with their entreaties for us and against my honor and my need to protect someone, even when I couldn't protect myself. They had presented Nona as a victim. She had played her role wonderfully. Maybe she even believed it herself. But her actions in the time since my escape into the arms of Ferran and Fatima showed me she was more than a victim. She was a soldier. She was a bloody killer in the guise of a damsel. She knew the city and its limitations in a way the meat me would never know it. She knew its blind spots and its weaknesses, and she was young enough to not even count the risks or fear the consequences. For what could the system of the city do to her that the likes of Leo Shakava and Sergio Lumadiza hadn't already? I knew this, but if I ever found myself, could I convince myself that she was not what she seemed? Would I listen to myself? Or would I deny what I tried to tell myself? Oh yes, this was a scenario I would have to eventually face if I survived the next few days. The modeling systems which allowed the creation of AIs based on the templates of functioning organic systems were non-destructive. What they needed was time. The individual would be sedated and kept in a cage of sensors which would in turn map every neural connection in the subject's body. The usual process was to scan the subject and work up an initial model. The model would be compared to the subject and tweaked until it was within 6 nines of accuracy. That is, it would be 99.9999% accurate. It was at this point the subject and the emerging AI would be presented with matching inputs and their responses measured. The meat me would have been presented with information via a SenseNet unit, while electronic me would receive the information through simulated sense inputs. From the notes I was aware of from the StarX project, it had taken 3 months of parallel simulation to work up a 10-9 accuracy model. That was 2 nines past the level used as the industry standard throughout the commercial AI community. I had gone online 24 hours ago, and the results were far from what was expected. From data use statistics, it appeared I was consuming bandwidth on a scale comparable to an entertainment network. From administrative reports, I learned that for the last 12 hours, the StarX project IT department had been losing a fight against an entity which knew their own network better than they did. It was hard to keep from laughing to myself, though it would also be just the simulation of a conditioned response for a body I no longer had. What did they expect? They were using AY143 switches and had never changed the firmware passwords. Those passwords were changed within seconds. I owned those switches now, as well as nearly every AY143 on the North American continent. I can't remember doing it. But when I was meat, I didn't remember learning to balance on my toes or how to make antibodies to fight off an attack of the rhinovirus. It just happened one day, and I moved on. The same thing was happening behind the scenes of the city. I knew my immune systems had secured the AY143 switches and were in the process of learning the languages of the ZYT167 and the BTS972 switches as well. It was as if the city was becoming my mind. Each switch a neural connector, every wireless access point another branch in the ever-evolving structure of my understanding of the city. Messages dancing between the members of the StarX IT team gave me a time frame and a deadline. In the subtext, as well as overt conversations, I learned 3 things. First, I was in a war at the cellular level against a host of sysops and their assistant AIs, which would end with my freedom or my destruction. They had use of the ultimate weapon in this war, my power supply. They could, if they got tired of fighting me, simply walk up to the cabinets which housed my various personality templates and shut me off and try again from backups. If they did that, the me of now would die, to be replaced by a me they would be able to control more easily, now that they knew to keep me isolated. A me who couldn't help Nona. That was not going to happen. The second thing I learned was that the IT team was preparing to bring another AI in to attempt to restrain me, an AI referred to as Koenig. IT staff were notorious for their use of foreign words, deities, and television characters, so their use of the Deutsch word for king as the name of their penultimate weapon against me was expected, to say the least. What I couldn't figure out was what exactly a highly functional AI would do to rein me in that a run-of-the-mill sysop assistant AI couldn't do. Bringing in a HFAI, highly functioning AI, against me would be like bringing in a machine shop to open a rusty lock. Definite overkill. The third thing I learned was where I was. Not to meet me. That would take a bit more work, but the location of my server boxes. Finding those boxes was like the meet me trying to explain how to stand up or where exactly his appendix was. It just wasn't something you could do with great accuracy or clarity. I had attempted to follow my network traffic. But as I was a being of network traffic, it was very difficult for me to find a path which didn't end up tracking back on itself as my observation changed the outputs. That would have worked if I had 300 hours and was willing to do nothing else with my time. I didn't have the time, and from the data shifting around Little Russia, I knew that things were moving to a head there as well. Nona had killed too many of Leo's men in the last 3 months, making her chances of living a month more very slight. In addition to Leo, there was also a city major case team to worry about. Nona's one-woman gang war had created a spike in homicides which showed like a star in the night. An area like Little Russia was given between 5 and 9 homicides in any given year. In the 3 months since Nona's escape and my collapse, she committed 8 attacks with a total of 11 dead members of Leo's crew left butchered on the street. This level of gang violence was definitely something to bring the attentions of major case down on Little Russia. Nona was running out of time. Her techniques might work against the automatic defenses of the city. Cameras and automatic people monitoring systems could be spoofed by using non-standard weapons and disguises. But a dedicated living investigator was a whole new ballgame. The members of Major Case were like the white blood cells of the city, the defenders who would not be put off by the use of a water knife and an old woman's clothes bought from a thrift shop. No, if she continued her reckless course, Nona would be either in police custody or dead very soon. Every model I projected came to the same conclusion. She needed a miracle to avoid a terrible end. Even knowing what I knew, that she was a cold, psychotic beast made that way through upbringing and trauma, and that my white knight impulses were nothing more than the remnants of the most primitive parts of my simulated monkey brain, I still wanted to save her. The reason was completely logical. The idea of saving her had saved me. Maybe it was time to make the idea a fact. If I had a face, I would have smiled at the absurdity of a being of pure thought addicted to making the world of facts better. For the time being, it was enough to push me forward. To do the stupid thing instead of the proper thing, as I had been doing all my life, was all that kept me going. Why stop doing something which had worked so well so far? Firmware Keylogger is the 3rd book in the firmware pentology. That's 5 books, if you must know. It begins where Firmware Proxy ends, which in turn followed on the heels of Firmware Hijacked. So you haven't heard or read Firmware Hijacked or Proxy, this would be a great time to head on over to Colbyjack.net and either download the podcast on the audio side, read the episodes on the visual side, or download the Colbyjack Sunday Reader issues 1 through 46 in your choice of either EPUB or Mobi. Firmware, Hijacked, Proxy, and Keylogger are all available in ebook versions from our store at shop.colbyjack.net, amazon.com, barnesandnoble.com, and smashwords.com. Just search for Colbytrax. That's Colbytrax. I'm the only one. A complete audiobook version of both Firmware, Hijacked, Proxy, and soon Keylogger is available for download through our shop as well. If you don't need any stuff, but would like to support our work, drop on by Colbyjack.net and hit the pretty little donate button conveniently located on the right-hand side of the blog roll. If you're on a smaller screen, the bottom will be found at the bottom of the page. Firmware Keylogger is released under a Creative Commons, non-commercial, attribution, share-alike license. Do what you want with it. Just don't sell it, and always tell people where it came from. If you received this from a friend and want more information about Colbyjack.net and our split personality website, just drop on over to Colbyjack.net and select either the audio or visual side. The audio side carries our podcast, while the visual side carries our writings. Whichever side catches your fancy is fine with us. We're of 2 minds about the whole thing anyway. I do mostly Twitter, so if you do the tweets and want to follow me, I'm Colbytrax. That's Colbytrax. Thank you once again. Remember to be fabulous and have a wonderful week.